It all started about 5 years ago when I decided to take my girlfriend Emily to the zoo. Now, do not get me wrong, I do not hate the zoo, but I have never been a huge fan either. There is just something unsettling about seeing animals trapped in cages. Not enough to stop me from going, though, but it is definitely not the kind of place I would visit on my own. I remember we both happened to have that Thursday off from work. Since it was a weekday, we thought it would be fun to check out something that would normally be packed over the weekend. Our idea turned out to be solid. The parking lot was only half full when we arrived, even though it was barely 9 in the morning, right when the gates opened. After we parked, Emily and I slathered on some sunscreen and made sure all the snacks we packed were stuffed in our backpacks. As soon as she spotted the big zoo entrance sign, she let out this excited little squeal. I could not help but grin. I was not there for the animals. Truth be told, I could take or leave them. I just wanted to watch her light up when she saw her favorites. I had no clue back then what was about to happen. If I had known, I would have done anything to keep her from seeing what we saw that day. Emily, if you ever read this, I am so sorry. I hope you can forgive me someday. We made our way toward the entrance gate. Emily clung to my hand and fought the urge to skip like a little kid, which made me chuckle. We found the ticket booth and got in line, talking about which animals we should visit first. Next! A cheerful voice rang out from the furthest booth. We stepped forward, and I was not giving the ticket clerk my usual full attention. Typically, I make an effort to be extra polite to folks working jobs like that, looking them in the eye, being patient, staying off my phone, just basic respect. I figure it helps make up for the rude customers who ruin their days. But in that moment, I was distracted. I had my wallet out, fumbling around for my credit card, and Emily was behind me, asking me something. I awkwardly turned toward her as I approached the counter. When I finally found my card and looked up to apologize for the delay, something weird happened. I glanced at the employee and then immediately did a double take without even meaning to. My brain just reacted. "No worries, sir. Take your time," the guy said with an over-the-top cheerful tone as Emily slid her card over to him. "Great. Let us get those tickets so you two can start having some fun." He kept talking, but I could not look away from his face. There was something deeply off about him, though I could not quite pin it down at first. The way he spoke stood out the most. It was way too happy, like he was reading lines from a kid's TV show or some kind of cartoon character. His smile stretched just a little too wide, and his teeth? They were too white, like something out of a commercial. And then there were his eyes. They looked like smooth marbles that moved just a little too independently from the rest of his face. I swear, I only saw him blink once, and when he did, it was painfully slow, as if someone had to remind him how to do it. His neck seemed just a bit too long for his body, and the proportions of his arms were strange too. His forearms looked shorter than what I would call normal. Oh, silly me, I almost forgot to mention something important. His voice hit a pitch that made my skin crawl. From here on, we are not accepting credit cards. You will need to click the link we emailed you to activate your zoo wallet. It is much more convenient than pulling out your card every time you want to buy something. I tried to tell him we were not interested and that we had cash, but he just kept going on and on about the new policy. Something about it felt off, like a scam. But Emily started looking uncomfortable. I did not want to ruin her day over some silly new rule, so I caved and went through the process. In hindsight, I should have seen it as a red flag when the guy insisted we both had to do it, but I just wanted to avoid any hassle. It was not worth the risk of getting kicked out and ruining the trip for Emily. "All set, you two wild ones. Make sure you catch the seal show at 12:15 by the main pool," the employee said, his grin somehow spreading even wider across his face. "Oh, thanks," I muttered, realizing I had probably been gawking at the guy like he was some kind of monster the whole time. We stepped through the entrance and were immediately greeted by the usual sights: gift shop on the left, a big map of the park, a snack stand, and a row of benches. I tried to brush off the unsettling feeling that had taken root in my chest and reminded myself to focus on Emily. I was here for her, after all. Whatever she wanted to see first, I would follow. But as we stood there, Emily seemed unusually quiet. I pulled her over into a shaded spot and asked if everything was okay. She looked around, her eyes darting nervously, like she was expecting something bad to happen. Sorry, Noah. It is probably nothing. That guy at the ticket booth just really creeped me out. Normally, if someone gives me the creeps, I get over it pretty quick, but she trailed off, biting her lip like she was not sure if she should say more. I let out a sigh, partly relieved I was not the only one who felt off about that guy. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Something about him was wrong. But let's not let it ruin our day, okay? We can keep an eye out, sure, but let's try to relax and enjoy ourselves. Emily gave me a small smile and nodded. You are right. Let's just have fun. First up, penguins, she said, her voice brightening as she grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the penguin exhibit. When we got there, her excitement quickly faded. The enclosure was completely empty. No penguins in sight. She seemed disappointed for a moment, but she shook it off and quickly led us toward the elephants. As we approached the elephant exhibit, we noticed it was empty too. I figured it was no big deal. Maybe some animals just were not out today. But Emily frowned like something was not sitting right with her. We spotted an ice cream stand nearby, and Emily suggested we ask the worker if they knew which animals were on display today. As we got closer, she suddenly gasped, grabbed my arm, and yanked me away from the stand. Did you see him? She whispered urgently, her grip on my arm tightening. No. What about him? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even though a chill ran down my spine. That guy, he looked just like the one at the ticket booth. Not exactly the same, but close. The same weird mouth, the same creepy eyes, the same strange arms. Noah, what the hell? Relax, Em. They are probably related or something. Maybe it is just a family thing, I said, trying to sound casual, even though my skin was crawling. Look, if he gives you the creeps, we do not need to get ice cream. Let's just keep walking. She hesitated but gave me a small, half-hearted smile. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Let's keep going. We moved on to the primate section, hoping to finally see some animals. A few of the exhibits were occupied. The chimps, orangutans, and baboons were all there, but the capuchins and gorillas were nowhere to be seen. We stood by the glass, watching the animals with a handful of other visitors. After a few minutes, Emily shot me a puzzled look, and I knew exactly what she was thinking. Noah, do they seem off to you? Are they sick or something? No, babe, they are probably just tired. Might be nap time or something, I said, trying to reassure her, though I had no idea how zoo animals were supposed to behave. I just wanted to calm her down, but I felt just as unsettled as she did. After a moment, Emily glanced around. I think I need to find a bathroom. I will be right back, okay? I watched her walk off, feeling a little uneasy about letting her go alone, but I figured I could use the time to get a better look at the animals without making her worry. Something about the way they were acting felt wrong, but I could not quite put my finger on it. I stepped closer to the glass in front of the orangutans. I have always had a strange unease around monkeys and apes. They feel so human that it just feels odd to observe them in a setting like this. But this experience was far worse than I expected. One of the orangutans locked eyes with me, and the way it looked back felt disturbingly human, making my stomach churn. I noticed it weakly reach for its side and winced in pain, revealing a line of stitches that looked red and sore. My heart sank, and I felt terrible for supporting a place that allowed this. A few minutes later, Emily returned, and I was relieved we could leave before she saw the orangutan in distress. We moved on, heading toward the tigers. When we reached the outdoor tiger enclosure, we spotted a few tigers lounging in the sun. This time it was painfully obvious that something was wrong. Parents began to pull their children away, and people were staring in shock, unable to look away. Some were laughing, thinking it was a joke. We should have left right then. There were so many signs that something was off. I cannot understand why we ignored them. As we approached the tigers, we saw something that took our minds far too long to process. At first, we thought we were looking at tigers, but then we realized the only tiger-like feature was their stripes. As we stared longer, it became clear what we were witnessing. People, human beings lying in the hot sun, painted to look like tigers. They had ears on their heads, and their torsos appeared elongated, while their arms and legs looked unnaturally short. It was evident they were human, but grotesquely altered to resemble something else entirely. Panic erupted in the crowd. People began screaming and sprinting for the exit, and Abby and I quickly followed suit. We fished our phones out to call 911, but to our horror, they were completely dead. No sign of life whatsoever. Looking around, I saw others in the same predicament, their devices lifeless in their hands. That link they made us click for the credit cards must have unleashed some kind of virus to fry our phones, Abby said, her voice strained from fear. I felt a rush of frustration wash over me. I should have known better. This was the oldest trick in the book. Now we were all trapped without a way to call for help. When we reached the gate, an employee shut all the exits, blocking our way out. Abby clutched my arm tightly, her grip shaking with fear. This employee looked like the others we had encountered, different hair color and height, but just as unsettling and uncanny. He turned to us, greeting us with a bizarrely cheerful tone. "Hello, everyone. What seems to be the problem? Aren't we all having a blast? You have to at least stay for the SEAL show at 12:15. The crowd, made up of about 50 people, erupted into chaos, shouting at him to let us out. His smile slowly faded into a frown as he grabbed a man standing nearby. The man screamed for release, but before we knew it, another employee joined him. One grabbed the man by the shoulders while the other seized his waist. As the man wailed in pain, they started to stretch his torso, elongating it grotesquely. Then they took hold of his arms and legs, forcing them into shorter shapes. The man finally stopped resisting and went limp. When they finished, they threw him to the ground, and his body now resembled the tiger's we had just seen, just missing the stripes and ears. The crowd fell silent, the horror settling in. Now, unless anyone else wants to join the tiger exhibit, I highly recommend making your way to the SEAL show, the employee said, a terrifying grin returning to his face. Right this way, folks. He started skipping toward the SEALs, and we followed in horror, unable to do anything else. I felt utterly helpless. I had promised to keep Abby safe, and even though she remained quiet, I could sense her trembling breath and feel her clammy hands gripping mine tightly. As we walked to the SEAL show, we passed a few more enclosures. I wish there was a way to shield Abby from the horrors I had seen, but the damage was already done. As we passed the bears, I was horrified to see more people sprawled out under the scorching sun. Awkward patches of fur covered their bodies, which were contorted into unnatural shapes. Then we approached a group of deer. Most of the people lay on the ground, but a few were trying to stand on their newly formed four legs, only to fall and scream in agony. I could see blood oozing from their heads where antlers had been affixed. After what felt like a marathon, we finally arrived at the SEAL show. About 10 employees surrounded us, all bearing the same disturbing features. The setup for the show was nothing extravagant, just a few rows of bleachers facing an in-ground pool, with an employee standing on a platform holding a microphone. The silence that hung in the air was glaring and painful. It felt as if we were anticipating some sort of sacrifice. The tension was unbearable. One of the employees stepped up onto the platform, his footsteps loud and echoing. "How is everyone doing today? I hope you're all having a fantastic time." His irritation at our silence was palpable. He repeated the question, this time louder and more aggressively. I said, "How are we all doing?" We clapped nervously, desperate to avoid drawing attention to ourselves. "I'm glad to hear everyone is having such a magical day. Just a reminder, we will be closing right after the SEAL show, so make sure to exit promptly. But remember, kiddos, leaving in the middle of a show is very rude." The show began with music blaring from the speakers, and another employee emerged, dragging something behind him. The employee with the microphone rambled on about SEALs, but my focus was drawn to the figure being dragged toward the pool. The person had their arms duct taped to their sides, their legs bound together, and a cheap-looking fin strapped to their feet, painted gray to resemble a seal. It was clear they hadn't been transformed yet. They struggled to scream, but duct tape muffled their voice, and they looked fully aware of their terrifying fate while being pulled into the water in front of 50 onlookers. Just as the employee announced that SEALs were great swimmers, the bound individual was thrown into the pool. We sat frozen in horror as they sank to the bottom, unable to break free. Panic spread through the crowd as people tried to fight back or escape. Abby and I were paralyzed with fear. witnessing helpless individuals being caught and transformed into something unrecognizable. The sight of so many people around us morphing into creatures was overwhelming. At least 20 people, now seals, had been tossed into the pool, utterly defenseless. 30 minutes later, the show concluded, and only about 15 of us remained on the bleachers as the employees took a bow. "Thank you for coming. Just a reminder, we are now closed. Our staff will escort you out of the park." The employees began walking toward the exit. Abby seemed relieved, her tears flowing as she desperately wanted to escape this nightmare. But I knew I had something I needed to do, something that might infuriate Abby and could cost me my life. The employees didn't seem to be watching us as closely anymore, and I realized I had to act immediately. "I'm so sorry, but I have to do this," I whispered softly, gripping her shoulder. Her head snapped to me, her eyes wide and filled with fear. As we followed the employees toward the exit, we rounded a bend with some bushes. Seizing the moment, I slipped into one of them, hoping against hope that the employees wouldn't spot me. They had made it clear the zoo was closed and that they wanted us to leave. I dreaded the thought of what would happen if I were caught. I crouched in the bushes, watching as the employees escorted Abby and the others out. I focused on staying completely still, reminding myself to breathe slowly. After about 15 seconds, they finally disappeared from view. I noticed how the employees skipped along, which somehow made them move faster. Feeling a surge of confidence, I decided to get up and search the zoo for anyone I could save. It might have seemed foolish to try, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the seals were still aware of their surroundings. Perhaps I could find others who hadn't been transformed so severely. I took off in a sprint. I didn't think the employees would come back, but I couldn't be sure. If there were people suffering somewhere in the zoo, I wanted to help them immediately. I dashed from exhibit to exhibit, checking if the animals had vanished completely or if they had been replaced by people. I had to determine if anyone was too far gone to save. An enormous weight settled on my shoulders. Who was I to decide if someone was worth saving? I quickly realized how to gauge whether people might be in an exhibit. If an animal was dramatically larger or smaller than a human, the animal was likely gone. Only those animals similar in size to humans were replaced by a person. This indicated that the employees' morphing abilities had limitations. When people morphed into animals, they didn't need to be exact size matches. They could stretch or shorten limbs and torsos, making it difficult for them to walk like humans. But that was about it. They couldn't grow ears or tails, nor could they add fins or fur, though they certainly tried to simulate it. Some exhibits still had people in them, even if they weren't the exact size of the animals. For example, the bear exhibit had people in it, suggesting the employees had a general understanding of animal sizes, but not an exact science. They knew a penguin was too small and an elephant was too large, but the line was blurry. As I looked into each exhibit, I called out to anyone inside. If someone could still talk, I would try to get them out. I knew that wasn't the ultimate measure of whether someone was worth saving, but my mind wasn't clear. I had to make tough decisions, knowing I couldn't help everyone. Most of the time, when I called out, nothing came back. Some people half opened their mouths, but no sound emerged, and they quickly fell silent. When I reached the zebra exhibit, I yelled in, and to my surprise, someone responded with a quiet, desperate, "Help!" The enclosure was easy to enter, just a tall fence, so I climbed in quickly. I dropped to my knees beside the person who had called out, and I was struck by how much worse it was up close. I tried not to look at their deformed body, but it was impossible, like trying to look away from a car crash. Their once human form had been twisted into something monstrous. Fake zebra ears were harshly sewn onto the sides of their head. Their hands were stitched together into a fist to mimic a hoof. Their body was coated in cheap white paint, with poorly brushed black stripes over it. A mane resembling a cheap party wig was superglued to the back of their head and down their neck. What turned my stomach the most was how their human face remained unchanged. The sickly, distorted body was nauseating, but the unaltered human expression made me feel like I would lose my lunch. It seemed the employees had put more effort into some transformations than others. Perhaps they had run out of time and rushed through the last few. When we first encountered the monkeys, they appeared to be sewn into fursuits, realistic enough to keep us from panicking, but still incredibly creepy. As I knelt beside the transformed person, I realized there was no way to free them. I felt foolish for thinking I could help anyone. My blind optimism had led me here. I thought I would find a way out once I saw someone in need, but now I had no plan. All I knew was that I needed to escape and call for help. Regret washed over me. I should have walked out with Abby and ensured her safety. If I had followed the group, I could have called the police by now. Why did I feel compelled to be a savior? While I wallowed in self-pity, I noticed something beneath the person. I gently pulled it out. A dirt-covered lanyard with a photo ID. The face matched the person in front of me. "Ken?" I whispered to the creature who had once been human. He looked up at me, a sad, weary smile spreading across his face. I could tell he was happy to hear his name again. It must have helped him feel a little more human, but just as quickly as his smile appeared, it vanished, replaced by pain. His bloodied, clenched fist fell to his side as he groaned. I could see something was terribly wrong, but I felt powerless to help. I sat with him for a few minutes, watching as he took his final breath. Guilt threatened to overwhelm me as I lingered beside his lifeless body. After a while, I resigned myself to the reality that I couldn't save anyone. I just needed to get out. Luckily, I was near the back of the zoo and spotted a brick wall I could jump. I climbed over with relative ease, suffering only a few cuts and bruises. Once outside the zoo, I didn't bother heading to the parking lot to retrieve my car or look for Abby. I just needed to find a working phone. 15 minutes later, I reached a gas station and used the phone to call 911. After that, I called my sister to come get me. If my phone wasn't working, Abby's likely wasn't either. I tried a couple of times as I waited for my sister, hoping for a miracle. When my sister arrived, we went straight to Abby's house. Her mom answered the door looking furious. She told me Abby didn't want to talk to me. I was sad to hear that, but relieved Abby had made it out and was safe at home. I told her mom I understood and headed home. I kept checking the news for any updates about the zoo, but there was nothing. The next morning, still no reports. I decided to drive back to the zoo around 2 p.m. Normally, it would be open until 6 p.m., but on the day I was there, they had closed early. I had to return. It was all I could think about. I needed to know what was going on. As I pulled into the parking lot, I was astonished to see it bustling with people. Families were coming and going, laughing and enjoying themselves. Confusion washed over me. I needed a closer look, so I parked and walked up to the ticket booth. My hands grew clammy as I approached the entrance. I had to know what was happening. From the back of the line, I spotted the employees, and they looked perfectly normal. I wanted to get closer, so I joined the line to buy a ticket. I was warmly greeted by the employee who handed me my ticket. She moved slowly but smiled warmly, and most importantly, she wasn't one of the grotesque creatures I had encountered the day before. She looked puzzled at her computer screen and asked a coworker for help. "Oh, I know what happened. You need to do this instead," her coworker said, randomly pressing buttons to make the computer work. "Ugh, I'm so sorry, sir. We've got your ticket working now. Apologies for the wait. Apparently a bunch of previous employees quit yesterday or something, and they didn't want to close the zoo while training new people. So most of the staff here today are brand new to the job. We appreciate your patience." I froze in place. I didn't know what to say or do. Those grotesque creatures had come in, morphed the zoo employees into animals, and terrorized so many visitors, only for the zoo to reopen the very next day. Did anyone even know what had happened? "Do you happen to have any information about what happened with the employees?" I asked the woman, only to receive a confused squint in response. No, sorry, I don't. I just needed the money, so I took the job." No, that's fine. Don't be sorry. I was just wondering if you knew," I replied, trying to ease the awkwardness as she stood in her ticket booth. I made my way into the park, and as soon as I entered, I noticed that all the animals, small and large, looked completely normal and healthy. I checked the enclosures where people had been trapped the day before, and to my astonishment, everything was back to normal. All the animals, regardless of size, had returned to their usual selves. The employees, too, appeared entirely normal. Determined to dig deeper, I conducted more research on the employees who had been brutally turned into animals. My search yielded nothing. It was all covered up. The zoo simply claimed that they had all quit. I couldn't fathom how their families were told about their disappearance. I tried to go to the police to give my testimony, but unsurprisingly, They didn't find it believable. Abby never wanted to tell anyone either. A few months later, she wrote to me, saying she could never forgive me for abandoning her at the zoo. She understood my desire to help others, but was hurt that I hadn't felt the same need to protect her. Since then, I haven't heard from her again. Even now, I have no clue what those morphing creatures were. It felt as if they attempted to disguise themselves as humans and put on a twisted show for us. Perhaps they were trying to impress us, or maybe frighten us. I will never know. It seemed like they held no respect for human life, yet cared for the animals. They never used real animal parts for their vile creations. It was always cheap replicas. The new employees seemed blissfully unaware of anything strange. Eventually, I managed to find a couple of old employees who had survived that horrific day. One of them was a janitor who showed up at the zoo the following day, only to find all the gates still locked and customers eager to get in. It took a while before they found someone with a key to let them in. When I asked him about how the animals looked that morning, he seemed puzzled by my concern. He said they were fine, just a bit hungry. So those creatures had taken the animals elsewhere for safekeeping while they played their sick game with us? I've tried to piece everything together, but I honestly just want to move on now. I'm posting this here for closure. I want to move forward with my life, and I hope that sharing my story will help me find some peace.